Headed home. Bagheera followed the wolves. He kept a leisurely pace while remaining mindful of the jungle. Cats can be vigilant with very little effort. It is in the blood, in the eyes, and the twitching whiskers. Bagheera's ears stretched back, then swiveled forward again, listening, always listening. There was rustling in some bushes about 3 banyan tree lengths away, but from the titter accompanying the movement he knew it was only muskrats. Behind him rhinos grazed, their signature sniffles and snuffs and sneezes rising in the midday air. To his left he heard birds building nests, another positive sign. Birds knew trouble on the wind even before the big cats, and the sound of their normal routine gave Bagheera comfort. Several paces ahead, Mowgli, full of youthful energy and vigor, bounced his way home through the jungle. The man cub loved the jungle and always had. Bagheera had fond memories of Mowgli's toddler days when the bold young man cub's fearless romps often forced the panther to tackle and hold down the wild cub to protect him from himself. But it was much harder for Bagheera to get his paws around him these days. They grow up so fast, the panther thought. Wolves do not hide in trees, repeated Bagheera, noticing the boy's ever-growing legs and his quick-moving knees. Even his stride was growing. A voice inside reminded the cat that the then man-cub would need speed one day. For an instant, they were a single beast. I wasn't hiding, said Mowgli. I was evading. Bagheera laughed. You ran up a tree to get away from a panther. He bumped up against Mowgli's waist, almost knocking him over. Even on all fours, the panther stood nearly as tall as the boy and outweighed him several times over. It almost worked, Bagheera. It was a dead tree. How was I supposed to know that? Mowgli picked up a seed and threw it. Bagheera stopped. It had a fig vine. Any tree girdled by a creeper is either dead or close to it. Mowgli stopped and turned toward the panther, putting his hands on his hips. You just can't say anything nice, can you, old cat? Huffed the boy. Bagheera shook his head and walked past Mowgli, patience worn leaf thin. We have had this conversation so many times, I fear I am talking to myself, man-cub. You must realize that until you can prove yourself, they are never going to let you join their council. Yeah, but if that tree didn't break, I would have been in, Mowgli said, smiling. Bagheera turned and leapt at Mowgli, putting the man-cub's head in his mouth. I think this might make it easier on both of us, said Bagheera. His mouth full, his words were muffled. It will put both of us out of our misery, and at least one of us will have a full stomach. Law of the jungle and all that. Stop it, Mowgli giggled, despite himself. You're messing up my hair. Bagheera let go, and Mowgli trotted away. You can't do that anymore, Mowgli called over his shoulder. I'm not a cub anymore. Bagheera watched him leave. He knew he was being hard on the man-cub, but it was a tough jungle out there, and it was just going to get tougher. The only thing that hadn't changed since Mowgli had first fallen under Bagheera's care was his basic need of survival. And for that, Mowgli needed a people to protect him. Council. Mowgli didn't think he needed anybody. He could handle things on his own. Well, that wasn't entirely true. But to Mowgli, it seemed everyone was hard on him and never let him do what he wanted to do. Everybody always worried about him, especially Bagheera, Mowgli's shadow. For as long as Mowgli could remember, Bagheera had been there, watching, corralling, pushing him like a mother bird picking at her little chick. And he was still doing it. Mowgli climbed over the hill, making his way to the wolf den. He was home. He felt the warmth of the place wash over him, inhaled the familiar smells, took in the sounds of the wolves. Home was like a coat he could slip on, unseen but always there, comforting him. Mowgli made his way towards the wolves on lower level. Dens for the individual families were made from caves and crevices, all clustered around a large flat area that was a playground for the young pups. To Mowgli's left, the adult wolves climbed to the hill to the Council Rock, a great stone dais that tore its way out of the earth and was the center of all wolf business. At the top of the rock sat Akela, leader of the wolf pack. Akela led with the deeds instead of his mouth. He had fought for his position as head of the pack and would stay leader until he could fight no longer. He was tall for a wolf. His gray, thick coat was unblemished save for the white tufts at the end of his paws. Mowgli knew Akela as a distant father figure, stern of eye and tooth. The man-cub wasn't sure if that made Akela a good leader, but the wolves listened to him, so Mowgli listened too. Well, mostly. Akela never approved of Mowgli's tricks, the little things the man-cub fashioned from twigs and leaves and vines, for playing with and for collecting water from the river. Mowgli knew he shouldn't disobey, but he couldn't help himself. He thought these tricks were clever, but Akela made it clear they were dangerous, and they were certainly not the wolf way of doing things. The boy watched Akela and the council from the lower level near Raksha, Mowgli's mother wolf, his Amma, and she nursed a young cub. Just close to Raksha settled Mowgli's restless heart. Raksha was home to Mowgli more than the rock or the jungle or even the old cat. Suddenly Mowgli was covered in swarming wolf cubs. They pounced and played on him with their stubby paws and rough tongues, and Mowgli laughed in spite of himself. Mowgli always wished to be a wolf, to be strong and fast as his brothers. But even though he was different, the youngest of the pack never made him feel like anything but family. He didn't know how much about where he'd come from before Raksha and Akela took him into their den, but he couldn't imagine life without them there in the jungle. They were his heart. The smallest wolf, a runt called Gray, leapt in a quick darting attack and batted at Mowgli's hair. "Mowgli, pick us up high," he said. Mowgli couldn't resist indulging the tiny cub. Gray's boundless energy and enthusiasm were infectious, even if he did impulsively sometimes. The man-cub playfully scratched the pup behind his black ears, the only part of him that didn't sport his namesake gray color. Mowgli looked at the rock, watching as the older wolves assembled without him. He knew he wasn't welcome there, not yet. Gray nipped at his fingers, trying to get his attention again. "How'd it go?" Raksha asked. He caught me again," Mowgli replied, wanting to get the words out quickly, and hanging his head low. Raksha moved up to Mowgli, the wolf cubs now nipping at her heels. She softly bumped her head into his. He butted her head back gently as she spoke. "If it is meant to be, it will be," said Raksha, making him feel a bit better. High above them, Akela stood proud, a giant in the jungle. He was surrounded by the council of wolves. Mowgli didn't know what council really meant. He knew those older wolves talked a lot, and they made decisions about things, and they told the other wolves what to do and where to go. They scowled often, their faces pulled into frowns. Maybe council meant never smiles. "Let me hear the law," said Akela. The wolves spoke as one, repeating the law. "This is the law of the jungle, as old and true as the sky. The wolf that keeps it may prosper, but the wolf that breaks it will die." Mowgli sat fiddling with dead straw and grass at his feet, mumbling the law under his breath. Like the creeper that girdles the tree trunk, the law running over and back, for the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. Mowgli didn't understand some parts of the law, and he thought maybe he never would, but saying it made him feel closer to the pack that he so desperately wanted to join. When the recitation of the law was done, every wolf in the Sononi Valley turned its snout to the sky and howled, long and loud. Mowgli tried a howl of his own, but it came out weak and strained as it always did, more of a squeak than a roar. Near him, Raksha sighed with her whole body, then turned and corralled the little cubs back to the den. Mowgli looked at Raksha and thought back to his walk with Bagheera. "Everyone always sighs around me," thought Mowgli. "Why must I inspire such deep breaths from everyone?" The wolf and the panther did their best to raise him, but sometimes they could see in their eyes just how different he was. Mowgli flecked his toes and laid on his back, looking up at the great arms of the trees above him and the sky beyond those. He dreamed with his eyes open, thinking about the day when he could be a part of the pack, or better yet, be his own pack. No one would call him man-cub anymore, or tell him what to do. He would be his own man-cub, and the jungle would look up to him. Maybe they would fear him the way they fear Akela. Mowgli shook that idea out of his head. He didn't want that. He turned over and played with the ants that marched by, feeling large in their little world, warmed by the sun on his back and soothed by the ants at his fingertips. Mowgli fell asleep in the arms of the jungle. End.